I sat perfectly still in the sterile, silent hearing room. My gaze was fixed on the grain of the polished mahogany table. Across from me sat Harrison Wolfe, my stepfather. He was a retired sergeant major who wore his arrogance like a faded uniform. He was smirking, certain this was just another family dispute he could shout his way through. Beside him, my mother, Victoria, just stared at her hands. She was a woman who had perfected the art of becoming invisible. A stone-faced general at the head of the table finally looked up from the thick file. His eyes landed on Wolfe with the weight of absolute authority. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Wolfe, you are here today regarding a domestic complaint that has escalated into a federal security inquiry." The general paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. "What you perceived as a family argument was in fact an unauthorized breach of a SIF-adjacent residence. You assaulted the primary asset for Project Silent. Spear." Wolfe's smirk did not just vanish. It was wiped clean and replaced by a mask of pale, slack-jawed confusion. The name of the operation meant nothing to him, but the tone in the general's voice was something he understood perfectly. Just 12 hours earlier, the air in my on-base quarters had been thick with that same arrogance. Harrison had been drinking all night to celebrate his new private security contract. His voice grew louder with every condescending remark about my career. He loomed over me, his breath thick with expensive bourbon. "You sit in a chilled room pushing buttons," he spat. His face was flushed with a dangerous shade of red. "You are not a real soldier, Alex. You are a disgrace to the uniform I wore for 30 years. I had heard it all 1,000 times before. It was the same tired speech comparing his infantry days to my cushy desk job. I stood my ground, my voice betraying none of my exhaustion. "Harrison, you need to leave my quarters immediately." He scoffed and shot a look at my mother. Victoria just wrung her hands in the doorway. She offered her usual silent plea for me to just absorb the blow. She wanted me to keep the peace at the cost of my own dignity. Then he shoved me hard. My head cracked against the doorframe, and stars exploded behind my eyes. Before I could recover, he grabbed my arm and wrenched it with all his weight. A sickening pop echoed in the small room. A fire of pure agony tore through my shoulder. I collapsed, my head hitting the sharp corner of my desk on the way down. Darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision. Through the haze of pain, I could see my mother just standing there. She was a statue of fear, saying nothing and doing nothing. As the world started to fade to black, my one good hand fumbled beneath the desk. My fingers found the cool metal of the secure comms device. I pressed the single pre-programmed key. An encrypted signal was sent out into the night. He saw a weak stepdaughter. My mother saw a problem to be ignored. Neither of them understood that in my world, an unauthorized hostile actor was not a family dispute. It was a Tier 1 security breach. To understand the hell that was about to be unleashed, you have to understand the two lives I was living. To my family, my life was a disappointment, neatly tucked into a uniform. My stepfather was the loudest voice in that chorus. He saw my quiet role in the army as a personal insult to his legacy of grit. At every family dinner, he would hold court at the head of the table. His voice boomed as he recounted the same old war stories. Each retelling made him a little braver and more central to the effort. His version of history was the only one that mattered. I remember one Sunday dinner with painful clarity. I had just received a commendation for a project I had spent 6 months perfecting. It was a system that prevented a massive logistics failure in a combat zone. When I mentioned it, He just chuckled. He did not even look up from his plate. He called me Captain Keyboard, a nickname that always got a laugh from his old buddies. They give those medals out for good attendance these days, he said dismissively. When are you going to get a real command? You spend your life babysitting computers. My heart did the familiar heavy plummet into my stomach. It was not just the comment itself. It was the weight of 1,000 tiny cuts. I saw the time he called my degree in cyber warfare a waste of a good brain. I saw every holiday where he asked when I was going to get my hands dirty. In his world, strength was measured in decibels and calluses. And I, with my quiet analysis and high clearances, was a failure. I was playing soldier while he had been the real thing. It was a narrative he clung to like a life raft. Then there was my mother, a woman who had submerged her identity into her husband's ego. She prioritized his pride over her own daughter's safety. She sat there smiling weakly, patting his arm, as if he had told a charming joke. Later that night, while I was helping her with the dishes, she pulled me aside. You know how he is, Alex, she whispered. She refused to meet my eyes. He is from a different era, and his service was so much more real. Just let him have his pride. She said it as if his pride was a finite resource I was selfishly draining. She wanted peace, but what she really meant was she wanted silence. My silence was her comfort. But that was only one half of my life. The other half took place in a world they could not possibly imagine. My real life happened in a place with no windows, chilled to a constant 60 degrees. It was a place known as the Skiff. It was there that my true value was not just recognized, but relied upon. I worked with men like Sergeant Major Morales. He was a quiet, formidable man who had spent 3 decades in intelligence. Morales never needed to raise his voice. His authority was earned through decades of quiet and critical competence. He had seen my work and recognized my talent for pattern recognition. He treated my assessments with the gravity they deserved. I remember standing before a massive wall of cascading data streams. The silent hum of the servers was a constant companion. My call sign, Aegis, was displayed on the duty roster. Morales stood to my right, and the base commander stood to my left. The air was thick with tension as I pointed to a specific waveform on the screen. My voice was low, confident, and precise. It was a tone my own mother had never heard from me. Sir, I began, addressing the general, the modulation here is a direct precursor to a coordinated breach. I assess with 90% confidence that an insider threat is planning a perimeter hit. There were no interruptions or condescending questions. The men just listened, their faces grim and focused. In this room, my analysis was everything. I advise a full lockdown and a counter-intel sweep, I concluded. The silence stretched for a moment as the weight of my words settled. The general looked from the screen to me. He did not second-guess me. He just gave a single decisive nod. Execute the protocol, he ordered. That one word was a world away from the insults at the dinner table. In that sterile room, my word was absolute. My judgment meant the difference between life and death for hundreds of soldiers. I carried a weight that Harrison Wolfe could never comprehend. He needed everyone to know he was a soldier. I just needed to be one. For years, I let them have their narrative. I built a wall between my two worlds to keep the peace. But when he put his hands on me on federal property, he broke more than my body. He broke protocol. And in my world, there is nothing more sacred than protocol. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and a dull throbbing in my shoulder. The world came into focus slowly. I saw white ceiling tiles and heard the rhythmic beat of a machine. Sergeant Major Morales was sitting quietly in a chair in the corner. Outside the door, I could see the polished boots of two CID agents. The emotional reality threatened to crash down on me. I thought of the violence and my mother's betrayal. But then years of training took over. I pushed the pain and anger into a locked box in my mind. The mission always came first. My first words were not about my family. I looked at Morales, my voice a dry rasp. Sergeant Major, what is the status of Silent Spear? Is the hardware token secured? He simply nodded, showing a universe of understanding in that one small gesture. He knew exactly what I was doing. I was framing this incident. This was not a domestic issue to be swept under a rug. This was an operational emergency. When the agents came to take my statement, I was clinical. I was no longer Alex, the daughter. I was Captain Steele, the officer filing a security incident report. I detailed the events with cold and lethal precision. At 23:57 hours, a non-cleared civilian made unauthorized entry into my quarters. I chose every word with a specific purpose. He was not my stepfather. He was a non-cleared civilian. I was not his stepdaughter. I was a mission-critical officer. He did not just hurt me. He initiated hostile contact and destroyed a Tier 1 encryption device. My final sentence was the most important. My last action prior to losing consciousness was to send the emergency arrest signal. That single word, compromised, was the key. An SOS is a call for help, but compromised is a notification. It is a procedural alert that a strategic asset has been disabled. It triggers an entirely different chain of command response. It took the situation out of the hands of local police. It placed it squarely in the realm of federal command security. I watched Morales take my signed statement. He did not need me to tell him what to do. I knew he would bypass the normal channels. He walked the file directly to the general's office. I could picture the simple cover note he would attach. Sir, this concerns the operational readiness of Aegis. The trap was now perfectly and professionally set. All I had to do was wait for the system to work. Harrison thought he was having a drunken argument. He had no idea he had assaulted a federal officer. He had triggered a high-level security alert. He had formally reported himself to the highest levels of the chain. The hearing was scheduled for 14 hours later. He was walking into my world now. He was playing by my rules. The inquiry room was designed to intimidate anyone who entered. It was stark and sterile and very cold. The heavy table seemed to absorb all light and sound. This was not a civilian courtroom. This was a place of absolute command authority. Careers were ended here with a single signature. I sat at that table in my full-service uniform. My left arm was held in a black medical sling. It was a silent physical testament to the violence. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was an analyst watching a complex system execute perfectly. Harrison and my mother arrived a few minutes later. They looked completely out of place in their civilian clothes. They looked like tourists who had wandered into a restricted zone. My mother was pale and clutched her purse with white knuckles. But Harrison still had a hint of that misplaced swagger. He seemed to believe this was a formality. He thought he could smooth talk his way out of a misunderstanding. He saw a family drama, not a federal inquiry. He was about to receive a very abrupt education. General Miller began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "This is not a mediation," he stated clearly. "This is a commander's inquiry into a major security breach." He gave a curt nod to the JAG officer. A stern-faced major opened a file and began to speak. He laid out the facts like steel bars in a cage. He read the entry logs from my quarters. He read the medical report describing my dislocated shoulder and concussion. Then the JAG officer called a communications specialist to the stand. The specialist testified that my signal had triggered a base-wide lockdown. The lockdown had cost the government hundreds of thousands of dollars. Harrison's face was starting to look very tight. The confident smirk was long gone. It was replaced by a twitching nerve in his jaw. He clearly could not understand why all this was necessary. Finally, he could not take the pressure anymore. "This is ridiculous," he burst out. "It was just a family spat, and she is being dramatic." The words were so loud in the quiet room, they hung in the air like a foul odor. General Miller let the silence stretch for an uncomfortable minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "Mr. Wolf, you will remain silent." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my stepfather's. "You seem to be under the impression that you attacked your stepdaughter. Let me be perfectly clear about the reality. At 23:57 hours, you assaulted Captain Alexandra Steele." The general paused to let the rank sink in. "She is the lead developer for Project Silent Spear. She provides the encryption that protects our forces in 3 theaters. In my command, her call sign is Aegis." A flicker of confusion crossed Harrison's face. The words were sinking in, but the meaning was still out of reach. The general was not finished with him yet. He picked up a piece of paper from the file. "The commendation you mocked at dinner last month," he said. "The one you dismissed as a participation trophy for a desk job. It was awarded for her work that stopped a breach at a major supply hub. Her work saved the lives of 22 soldiers on the ground." The general looked up, his eyes boring into Harrison. "Soldiers from your old battalion were among those saved. That was the blow that finally broke him. It was not just a revelation. It was an invalidation of his entire life's narrative. The real soldier had been saved by the girl he despised." The general delivered the final crushing sentence. "When you injured her, you disabled a strategic asset. You did this during an active threat window. You are lucky you are not being charged under the Espionage Act." All the color drained from Harrison's face. He looked pasty and sickly gray. His entire identity as a war hero crumbled into dust. The quiet girl he belittled held more power than he ever dreamed. Instinct took over his body. His decades of discipline betrayed his ego. He straightened his back and squared his shoulders. He almost snapped to attention before his superior officer. He was utterly and completely defeated. Beside him, my mother covered her mouth. A choked and horrified sob finally escaped her. It was the sound of a woman drowning in her own shame. My stepfather spent my life lecturing me on duty. It took 5 minutes for a general to teach him about consequences. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a deafening silence filled with wreckage. General Miller closed the file with a soft thud. He looked at Harrison with pure professional disgust. "Mr. Wolf, you are hereby permanently barred from this installation. I am also recommending an immediate review of your retirement status. Your behavior is unbecoming of the rank you once held." He gave a slight nod to the MPs at the door. 2 uniformed officers stepped forward with impassive faces. They did not need to put their hands on him. They were a professional and inescapable escort. Harrison stood up on shaky legs. He looked like a hollowed-out version of a man. He allowed himself to be led from the room. He did not look at me or anyone else. As he passed, I felt absolutely nothing. I felt no hatred and no pity. It was just the quiet closing of a door. My mother remained in the room, a lonely figure. She took a hesitant step toward me. Her hand was outstretched, and her voice was a whisper. "Alex, please." I did not know it was this serious. I met her eyes for a brief second. I saw the desperation and the dawning horror. She was pleading for an absolution I no longer had. But I also saw the years of her quiet complicity. I saw the 1,000 times she chose his pride over me. There was nothing left to say to her. Without a word, I turned and walked away. I fell into step beside Sergeant Major Morales. I did not look back at the woman in the hallway. I left her standing alone in the cold silence. 6 months passed after that day. I spent that time in physical therapy for my shoulder. It was a slow and painstaking process. I also spent that time building a fortress around my life. The medical sling eventually came off. The pain faded into a dull memory. The promotion board came and went. My name was at the top of the list. I was now Major Alexandra Steele. My world became the quiet hum of the SIF again. I lived in the complex dance of data on the screens. I enjoyed the respect of my peers every single day. The noise of my old life just faded away. I stood in front of a command briefing screen today. The IE room was filled with colonels and department heads. A new threat was emerging overseas. I was leading the intelligence briefing for the general. I moved through the data points with effortless authority. I answered sharp technical questions with calm precision. The people in that room were relying on me. My analysis would affect the lives of thousands of miles away. There was no condescension in this room. There was only aegis. And in this world, my word was trusted completely. After the briefing, I went to the break room. I sat with Morales and my team of analysts. We drank stale coffee and shared inside jokes. The camaraderie was deep and unspoken. It was a bond forged by mutual respect. We were a team, and we were a family. This was a family built on competence and trust. It was not built on dysfunction and obligation. This was my real legacy as a soldier. Later that night, I went back to my quarters. The door was now fitted with a high security lock. It was a small but significant symbol of safety. An email notification popped up on my laptop. The subject line was a single word. Please. It was from my mother. I opened it with a neutral expression. I scanned the long paragraphs of excuses and apologies. I was so scared of him, she wrote. He is a broken man now, Alex. The words were ghosts from a life I no longer lived. It was a plea from a world I no longer inhabited. I read the first few lines and took a breath. I felt no anger or sadness anymore. I just felt a quiet and final sense of closure. I clicked the email and dragged it to the trash. I emptied the trash folder without a second thought. I turned back to the data streams on my monitor. A small and confident smile touched my lips. I isolated a new threat pattern in the code. I was exactly where I belonged. My stepfather believed a legacy was written in stories. I learned that true power is measured in silence. It is measured by the protocols that have your back. If you have ever used your world to teach respect, share your story. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.